searching history for buried classics. This is Lost Treasures of Gaming.
Welcome back to another episode of Lost Treasures of Gaming, and we have a treat for you today, don't we, Sid?
We absolutely do.
We should probably introduce ourselves first, though.
Yeah, sure we can.
Okay, I am your host, Sean Evans, otherwise known as Zion everywhere.
And I'm your other host, Sid Bolton, your gaming archaeologist from the OMG Hour, and I'm known as Dirk the Daring on PSN and Xbox.
Which is fitting for this week.
Very fitting, because Dirk the Daring, of course, the lead character, the hero, the bumbling idiot that stars in my favorite arcade game of all time, Dragon's Lair.
Dragon's Lair, yes. So we're going to be talking about Dragon's Lair, but not the Dragon's Lair you'd think we'd be talking about. A very specific version of it. And it, as we mentioned in the show, that Dragon's Lair is one of those games, Sid, that is pretty much everywhere.
It is. It's been ported to so many platforms, and so many different versions of Dragon's Lair have been good, and so many have been bad. But today we're going to talk about a very specific version, and that's the Game Boy Color version. And we are very fortunate tonight to have with us the creative director of the Dragon's Lair Game Boy Color version, Mika.
Yes. So let me ask you, Sid, why this version? Like when we planned to do Lost Treasures for Dragon's Lair, why this version that you wanted to do?
Well, the thing about this particular version, I think, that stands out amongst all the others is that the technical prowess of this version and the capabilities of what have been done to actually get this game to run full motion video on the Game Boy Color back in 2000 was an absolutely amazing technical feat. So taking a very good game to begin with, a standalone that was in the arcade with some very specific hardware, but then try to get it down to a platform that is very limited in sound, in color, and more importantly, resolution, is pretty amazing. And so,
memory.
And memory, yeah. I mean, Game Boy games, of course, were distributed on cartridge, and those cartridges have a very finite limit, as we'll learn. And it just, it's pretty amazing what they did. So I always thought if I was to look at sort of the whole spectrum of Dragon's Lair games and try to pick one of them that I thought was really a lost treasure, it would have to be this Game Boy Color version.
Excellent, excellent. So then why don't we go talk to Mika about all of the wonderful creativity that went behind the scenes to get this game into such a small form factor back in 2000 on the Game Boy Color. Michael, welcome to Lost Treasures of Gaming. It's awesome to have you on the show.
Oh, it's great to finally be on it. It's one of these shows I've been listening to, and I can't believe I'm a part of it. This is great.
You've actually been listening to it. That's awesome.
Sid's one of these guys that's been around hovering in my social circles for so long that I had to stumble into it, I think, and it's very easy to do.
And if we lived closer, Mike, we'd be like hanging out all the time. I just have this feeling it's just huge distance, We'd be like, I'd be helping out your collection, you'd be helping out my collection.
Internet bros. There you go.
We'd be hanging out at the beach all the time, hand in hand.
Yeah,
talking about Dragon's Lair.
And Kmart. And our Kmart stories, our 8-bit Kmart stories. Anyway.
Awesome. Michael, before we get into the one game we want to concentrate on today, why don't you just tell our listeners a little bit about you and your history in gaming?
Sure. I've been gaming since as far as I can remember. I think... God, I remember how old I was when I first started playing a Rally 4 Pong that was from Radio Shack, I think. And
old enough to crawl, probably.
Old enough to crawl. And I remember playing that game by myself because it was a 2-player game, obviously, and I learned how to be ambidextrous and like play both sides and see which hand was worse than the other and that sort of thing. When my dad wasn't around to play, and I started playing on that, and I was born in '73, so like I was born at the right time to experience everything about video games from the birth to where we are today. So I had just about everything, or I had friends who had everything, from ColecoVision, Atari, all that stuff. But my real passion came when my dad brought home a Commodore 64, and I figured out how I could actually start making games. And so now I went from playing the hell out of games all the time to making games. And that was just a passion I had all the way through college and everything else. And I never thought I would actually make games professionally. I just thought it was like a really fun hobby. And then by the time I graduated from college with like my English degree and a minor in film and all stuff, I wanted to be a movie maker. It dawned on me that I actually had skills that were more likely to be successful for me in video games than anything else, because film, you might as well just give up. And, well, I hate to say that, but, you know, for me, I should have given up because all I want to do is make Bigfoot movies and stuff. And then, like, games, I realized I had a whole portfolio of, I think, nearly 100 games that I've worked on over the years that could show somebody, and that got a lot of attention. So it was real easy to switch over to doing games, and it just kind of took off from there. I've worked on probably, I think I'm over 200 games shipped now that I've had some part in.
Wow.
And it sounds crazy and all stuff, but you have to keep in mind, like, I work on mostly smaller and digital titles. I never really worked on anything that's like a Call of Duty scale game. It's always been more smaller, personal things, ports of games that I really liked, and that sort of stuff.
Now, so you're still a gamer, obviously. Like, do you play all these big titles, the ones that you're not working on?
In fact, I think that's the best thing about working on smaller games is, like, you get kind of jaded on what the types of games you work on. So, like, I don't want to not like Halo someday. So if I could just keep my distance from those kind of games, then I can enjoy those and decompress with those games, but then, like, find the passion in this genre of games that I like to make, which are like digital, smaller games and that sort of thing.
What is the most memorable game you've worked on?
Oh, that's a good one. That's a good question. Like, you can answer that in a couple of ways. Like, most memorable for me and the most memorable that people probably will know me for. And there's an ironic one too. So, I think a lot of people know me for my most recent game now, which took over from, like, working on Street Fighter Turbo HD Remix and stuff like that. It's IDARB, which stands for It Draws a Red Box, and it's like kind of my most personal and dumbest game I've ever worked on, but now, like, most people know me for that. And then most people know me for a game I didn't really work on, but I hacked, which was the Donkey Kong hack, where I hacked the Mario to be Pauline saving Mario for my daughter. And so when I go into meetings now, like, I've worked on 200 games, I've worked with every major publisher and things like that. Like, I go into a meeting and I get introduced as the Donkey Kong dad and all this stuff. And, like, I was at PAX this week, and, like, a friend of mine, you guys know Tim Schafer, and so, like, I've known him for a little while, and he's introduced me to these people at this table, and he's like, "This is the Donkey Kong dad." And it's like, well, nice. I guess it's a good thing, but it's like, I'm mostly known for that these days.
Awesome. Of course, you are also known for porting or assisting in the port of Sid's most favorite game in all the world, Dragon's Lair, to the Game Boy Color.
Yes, that was a crazy, crazy project. And the team that was on it, so I was basically the studio head of the studio involved, and that started life in a really weird way. My brother and I, we were going to the Classic Gaming Expo, and around this time, he was working on a video compression algorithm that we'd used in a Game Boy Color game called Tarzan for Disney. It was based off the Tarzan animated feature. And so it was this kind of, he had come up with this really impressive way to fit a lot of data in a small space for the Game Boy Color. Because of its limitations, you could actually do a lot of shortcuts. And so he did this. We had all these, like, kind of full motion video sequences. Nintendo thought it was really cool and all stuff. And so he, like Sid, like, Dragon's Lair was one of our favorite games. So we thought, like, well, how far could we go with this video compression? So what he had done is he put together a really small demo that we took to Classic Gaming Expo and we showed it around. And it was the opening, I think it was the two or three of the opening sequences, and it just kind of stopped there. And it was a high color mode version too. The ultimate final version wasn't in high color mode, but high color mode is very similar to the Amiga hold and modify mode, where we were changing colors going down the screen. And that resulted in using way too much space because you have all this color data now you have to track, and that would never fit on a cartridge. But for the demo, it was impressive enough. And so we were able to show off that demo, and it was also the same time that Rick Dyer, Gary Goldman, and Don Bluth were signing posters, I think, that year for Dragon's Lair. Even though we didn't really talk, we showed it to him, but we didn't really talk directly about it. He remembered it by the time that Jeff Vavasor, who was our chief technical officer at Digital Eclipse at the time, made an official contact. He had already remembered that demo and all that stuff about that, and we were kind of like, what if we did do this game on Game Boy Color? If it were possible, would they be interested in letting us do it? And so that's kind of how it got kicked off. Rick Dyer really wanted to do it, and I think if you know Rick and, like, Sid, you've probably met him a few times, if there's someplace Dragon's Lair can go, it will go there. So
right.
it was like,
if
it wasn't like it was a fight.
To license it for that he can make some money off of for that, he will do it. Yeah.
Oh yeah, there was like this washing machine that had Tetris on it, and I remember seeing that going like, that's crazy. They put Tetris everywhere. But like if Rick Dyer had seen that, he would have tried to put Dragon's Lair on it as well.
Yeah. Well, it's on a slot machine, so like it's just about everywhere, and not everywhere that you'd even expect. So there you go.
It's even on him because he has a Dragon's Lair shirt that he has like this button down, really awesome Dragon's Lair shirt that I want really bad.
Oh man, so when you made that, or when you guys worked on that demo, were you just trying to show what the technology could do, and you picked Dragon's Lair because Dragon's Lair was just something that you thought was cool, or did you really have it in mind from the very beginning that would be the perfect game to use that technology with?
I think. If I remember correctly, it was more or less a technology demo we wanted to shop around to show people that we could do that sort of thing for any sort of video situation. We never fathomed at the time that we could really fit it on a cartridge. It wasn't until Jeff Vavasor, who wanted to like take it further, did the math, and he realized like if certain conditions are met, you theoretically could fit the entire, was it like 20 minutes or whatever it is of total video. Yeah. Onto the cartridge. And so he did some loose math and felt pretty confident that could be done. But we would have to really get rigorous about our tool set and what we worked on. And so he started working on a quantizer that took the data we already had and some extra scenes that I think he was ripping and was able to quantize that down. And we learned really quick that like it isn't just taking the video and porting it. We would have to do a lot more cleanup than that, a lot more stuff on top of that. So, but all that said, we were pretty confident we could probably do it as long as we found the right partner willing to buy the largest cart size for the game. And so it turned into a roadshow where we took the latest version of the demonstration and we would take it to different publishers. And Capcom was already looking to publish, I don't think they ultimately published it, but they were looking to publish the new console game they were working on at the time, which was the full roaming 3D, real 3D cartoon shaded Dragon's Lair game, which I thought was pretty cool.
Dragon's Lair 3D, yeah.
Yeah. And so they were already in motion with Capcom on that. And so I think the plan was Capcom was going to publish all of them. And but that game was taking a while. But Capcom, we had already worked with them on a couple things before, so we had a relationship with them. And they knew that we could probably finish it, even though it sounded crazy. So they signed us up. And I think we shipped the game. I think we shipped the game before the console game came out.
Yes.
And Capcom, I don't think, is the final publisher on the Dragon's Lair 3D anymore. It was like somebody else, I think, in the end. So the relationship there, for whatever reason, maybe because of like price or cost and how long it was taking to make the game, that moved the rest of the SKUs over, but they were able to publish under Capcom, which is why it's an unusual thing to see Dragon's Lair standing alone with Capcom on that.
Right.
And so then we went into production. And at this point, I was busy on a project. My brother was busy on a project. And we have this awesome engineer. Her name's Catherine Mataga, who was an old Atari 800 engineer that we were all big fans of. She wrote Seamus and I think Zeppelin and all these other games. She'd worked with us on a bunch of Game Boy games. She was available, and so she took to what we already had and probably threw most of it away and then started working on how we could go about taking that same kind of approach and compressing it down. And meanwhile, we had another super hyper-talented engineer who just worked with us recently on this Yu-Gi-Oh! Project for Xbox One and PS4. We've worked with him that many years. He started working on a final tile quantizer. He called it Tile Killer. And so this thing, you could feed it an image, and it would just quantize that thing down to the footprint you needed. So if we said, we need this thing to be 4K, and it's an hour-long movie, it would do its best to make an hour-long movie fit in 4K. It may not look like anything recognizable, but you would sit there and play with that, and then you could take those frames that it kind of hacked up and tried to make right, and you could clean those up and then run it through it again. You kind of go through this process of like cleaning it up, putting it through, checking if it got big or small, do it again, do it again, do it again. So we lit up, I think, like 8 artists probably on there. There were people like Ronnie Fike, Kevin James, who else was on there? I'm going to forget everybody, but like we had a whole team, Arvin Batista, all these guys that were all our staff artists pretty much jumped on it and started helping deliver this game. And so they would take sequences and individually go off and try to quantize that themselves by hand and then run it through to the Tile Killer and try to reduce the game to its barest minimum things. And along the way, we're trying everything we could to make that process easier for everybody, because that was painstaking, just trying to reduce this awesome game that we all love down to such a small screen resolution, which I don't even remember off the top of my head, but it was so small. And do it with as much solid colors as we could, because that would compress really well.
Right.
So going through that whole process, we're trying anything we could, and even the guys from, I keep wanting to call them ReadySoft, but like, what's their most recent name? Digital Leisure.
Yeah, Digital Leisure. Yeah.
ReadySoft's burned in my brains from the earlier days. And but they would send us archives of things, and one of the archives was probably closest to being almost useful was the Atari Lynx archive. So they were developing it for Atari Lynx, and they'd given us this box full of floppies of their own hand conversions that they were doing for the Atari Lynx, because they were attempting the same kind of process for the Atari Lynx. But I don't think they ever really got it to a very good playable state. I think I still have a backup of those discs somewhere, which I've been now going through hard drives trying to figure out where all that stuff is, because it'd be fascinating to see what their approach really was.
I'd love to work with you on that.
All right. Well, we could probably also get a hold of them, and they probably, I'm sure, have it as well. So I
don't think they do, and we can have this conversation offline. But yeah, so basically what that Lynx version was, and it's here comes my plug for my book. It's in my Collecting for Dragon's Lair and Space Ace, which is available on Amazon. But in the book, I mentioned that version, but and that version, the source for that version was the original stuff that had been done for the Amiga, because, like you said, what they had done with the Amiga version was they literally took every single frame. Actually, it wasn't every single frame. They actually skipped a couple frames. Instead of being 24 frames a second, it was like 12. And they took every other frame from the Laserdisc, and then they digitized it onto the Amiga with this particular product, which, by the way, was created by Anthony Wood, who went on to found Roku. He was a vice president at Netflix. And
nice.
Yeah, and that also explains why some of the employees at Roku are the original Amiga guys, like Dale Luck, who did the graphics and stuff like that. But anyway, so all of the frames were, digitized, and then they were, like you said, the more solid colors were put in, because if you've ever watched any early digitized computer animation, you can see all these spots that seem to change, and when you're doing delta compression, that just creates more data that doesn't really result in any meaningful end result, and it just takes up more space. So they literally had artists going through and repainting every single frame, and it's kind of strange, this game that was full animation done in a traditional way on film originally. It's amazing how it's been redone backwards and forwards. In other words, it's been done backwards to go onto a platform that didn't have the resolution or the color set or anything, such as the Game Boy Color version that you did and the Amiga. And it's also, been touched up and worked on going the other way, so that original film was then restored, and then literally every single frame that's on the Blu-ray version has been enhanced and retouched by hand. So it's kind of interesting that this game that already had this animation that was done in a traditional film manner has been redone and redone and redone backwards and forwards. So it's kind of
more than any other animated feature of any other kind, probably too. It's
probably
crazy.
Yeah, and certainly there certainly hasn't been as many conversions of something like that to as many video formats. That would make an interesting article just to figure out how many sort of different resolutions and targets that this particular set of animation has been done. So quite a technical feat to get this done. And I know the answer, but maybe you can tell us, how big was that cartridge that ended up shipping?
You're getting me to my brain into the Nintendo world of like megabit versus megabyte and all that stuff. Like I forget what was the largest. It was the largest card available at the time for the Game Boy Color, which was it 64 megabit or 32 megabit? I don't remember. It was
4 megabytes inside.
4 megabytes, so that was 32 megabits or whatever it was in the Nintendo thinking, right? So it was the largest, and Capcom really wanted us to shrink it. That meant like cutting the game in half, and we're just like, we can't do it. And so they finally bit the bullet. And I think that's why it had such a low run, because they basically, instead of us shrinking on our side, they shrunk the amount of units to produce to match the same amount of money they wanted to like invest in it.
Right, and if it's anything like the Nintendo DS, because by the way, the same problem happened when the game came out on the Nintendo DS, because I was involved in that version, and the same thing was constantly there. It's like, are we going to put it on the largest cart size that we can get and increase the animation, or are we going to make it smaller? And in that case, it did end up getting smaller than it could have been. Mm-hmm. So the quality of the video did suffer somewhat from that. Although the download size was slightly smaller than the cartridge size that came out later, because originally the plan was to only release it as a download. Yeah. But it's interesting that, and just so people understand, I don't know what the difference in price was back in those days for the Game Boy Color versions, but essentially I believe it was a difference of maybe a couple of dollars a cartridge, which doesn't sound like a lot, but when it translates to retail, it ends up, and certainly when you multiply it by the thousands, tens of thousands of copies you have to order, just to even meet minimums from Nintendo, it does translate to a lot of real world dollars that, every single dollar essentially per cartridge is more of a risk, right? That you're going to lose money.
Yeah, exactly. And there's also the notion that was going on at the time that, there's another round of that classic Nintendo. We don't think we have enough to produce these carts, especially the larger carts. Right. There was a situation where those were limited quantities because nobody used them. And right. So we were kind of worried that we wouldn't even have enough carts to do it and all that sort of thing. So it was a weird thing. And Nintendo would change the price sometimes just without even telling you. And you would find out this is the latest pricing on this or whatever. So it was still kind of those days, and it was challenging. So we stuck to our guns, and Capcom, we had such a great relationship, and still do actually, which is crazy. In the game industry, you never hear that. They agreed, and so they did everything on their side to make sure it happened.
Now, you guys brought up something interesting that I don't even think I even knew, that cartridges came in different sizes. Like the developer had to choose what size cart to put their game on. That's not something I think I ever knew.
It was not only just the cart size, but also the kind of, like, do you have battery backed RAM? Do you have just standard RAM? How big is the RAM that you add in? All that stuff added up at the cost of goods for the game. And so what everybody really wanted was your game to fit on the smallest cartridge with no extra RAM, so that you could just put it out there really cheap and save all this extra money. So that's why you have a lot of games that, even in the day when you would say, wow, these games they have save game slots and all that stuff, why does this one have a code? It's because the publisher is like, we can't afford to have a battery backed up RAM or save RAM or whatever.
Wow. Right. And interesting. That's great information. I honestly had no idea.
Yeah, I probably can't officially share it with you, but I can show you what like a price list looks like from, say, I don't have it for the Game Boy Color, but certainly from the Nintendo DS, I have that kind of information because I remember those conversations going on. But it really, especially, like, people don't realize developers today have it a lot easier in terms of size and restrictions. And even, have we forgotten even about when Xbox Live first started, right? There was like the 50 meg download limit. Like, we've totally forgot about that. Can you imagine, look at when you first turned on the PS4 and the Xbox One when they came out. I remember, the first downloads were like
2 gigabytes.
50 gigabytes for some games,
yeah,
right? I mean, if you had a full PS4 game, they were 50 gigabytes
Oh,
in
yeah,
size.
yeah, for the game, sure, yeah. Absolutely.
And I mean, think about if we still had those restrictions. But what that meant is that it actually affected the game, right? Because the publisher, you're fighting this constant war as a developer versus the publisher saying, look, we're only going to pay for this, so you have to figure out how to get this game down to this size. And so that ultimately affects the final product that you make in one way or another. And certainly with Dragon's Lair, that would be the primary concern, right? Because once you have the engine done and you have something that can essentially do the QuickTime events, the actual game beyond that is simply a script with all the different rooms and what the QuickTime events are, and then all this video. So probably 98% of what's on that cartridge is the actual video.
Right. Now,
that's right.
Do you guys know offhand how big the original game was? Like, how much memory capacity was the original game? Because, Michael, you said you got it down to fit on a 4 megabyte cartridge.
It's a tough thing to really say, because if you're looking at, like, what is a Laserdisc hold, right? Like CAV side Laserdisc.
Well, it's analog, right?
Yeah.
So the original source, and I mean it would depend on, but I can give you one comparison. And if you look at and I don't remember the exact number, but if you look at how it went the other way in terms of the size it is on the Blu-ray, 4 megabytes represents 0.115% of what the Blu-ray takes up. So, talk about, a difference in size, right? From sort of what's arguably the smallest version, because even the Amiga version shipped on 6 discs that were 1 megabyte apiece.
Yep.
Because actually they only stored 880K, but Randy Linden, who was the technical developer behind that version, later went on to do Doom on the Super Nintendo, and also the very interesting PlayStation emulator on the Dreamcast, and that's another story.
Oh, yeah.
Bleem, if anyone remembers Bleem. Yep. But basically he had figured out how to get 1 megabyte per disc, and it shipped with 6 discs, but and I'm pretty sure that I'm correct on this, there was actually less scenes in that version, that Amiga version, than there was in the Game Boy Color, because you didn't quite have the whole game in there. Is that right? Like
we did have to eliminate. I wish I knew off the top of my head which scenes we eliminated, but we did have to eliminate some stuff to make it actually fit. So it was better than having to cut it in half. But by the end, and time was coming up, we had to sacrifice some things. Like we had a lot more sampled audio in the game, and we had a lot more scenes. There was scenes that were on the cutting room floor, and then we had to get rid of most of the audio. You'll still hear some grunts and groans and little stabs from dragons there, but we had way more samples in that game originally. And that's the other thing too, is like playing full motion video and samples at the same time on a Game Boy Color was also an amazing feat that Catherine was able to pull off, thanks to some of the techniques that we'd learned from some of the previous games that also went in play here, because even samples tend to take up even more space than some of the animation we were doing. We got really good at getting scenes compressed, but the audio and the way audio had to be digitized and played back on the Game Boy Color, you have to sacrifice one thing or the other. And for us, like if we were to decompress audio and decompress animation, there wouldn't have been any time for that. So there's some really nice tricks that Catherine pulled off to make sure that we could even play some sampled audio during all that.
Now, as Dragon's Lair was ported over the years to the computer formats and whatnot, a lot of times people would kind of call them lazy ports, because they were just sort of, the digitizing technology on PCs got better, and so it was simply taking the Laserdisc and converting it and so on. I noticed that the Game Boy Color version almost invariably has gotten very high reviews when compared to almost any other version of the game, and I find that Dragon's Lair tends to be polarizing, right? You either love the game and you have the nostalgia because you remember it, or you hate it because you're no good at it and you can't remember the moves and it seems dumb. So does it surprise you today to look back and still see how well people remember that version and talk about it, and how the reviews were so good? Does that surprise you at all?
It does. It really does surprise me, because having worked on so many games, it's one game that anybody who was around, especially developers who were around during those days and were working on Game Boy games, they will always bring it up because they were shocked that it pulled off what it did. And I think it was one of these things that at the time the reviews I think were affected by that a bit too, because it was just something you didn't normally see on a Game Boy Color. And so I think immediately people thought of the technical aspects of it and what went into making that happen. And I think it kind of clouded, any sort of misgivings they may have had about Dragon's Lair. They're just, surprised that this little device could do that. And I think it really helped the review scores.
Yeah.
Well, at the time, people were looking at these, really simple, pre-NES looking games, really. It was only probably a quarter of the way into the life cycle of the Game Boy Color that people started to really push the technology a bit, and so you didn't really see things like that until about that point.
Yeah, I mean it's such an interesting thing, and I've noticed, I don't know who's put it out there, but someone has an online version that you can play on the web, and obviously it's an emulated version, and so I believe that's likely we have a partnership with someone who's going to be streaming. He streams every game that we play, and we'll be giving the link to where to watch that. But on Friday nights at is it 11:30, Sean?
Yeah, 11:30 Eastern time.
Yeah, so he always streams the games that we talk about in Lost Treasures of Gaming. So I'm looking forward to seeing how well he does in the color version today.
Fred's got some practice to do.
Yeah.
You know what? You just reminded me of something. We were working on a Shockwave. Remember Shockwave games?
Yes.
And those old Flash games. We were working on Dragon's Lair for that with Rick Dyer. And it was going to be an entirely reconverted Flash version of Dragon's Lair. And we had that pretty far along, and then Shockwave pulled the plug on that. I wonder if we still have that around, too. That was pretty interesting to do.
That would be something that would be good to go in my canceled versions of my second edition of my book coming out early next year.
There's another plug for Sid's book.
Another plug, yes, when the book finally goes digital.
Remind me, because I'll get you the information on that. John Welsh was heading up Shockwave Games, I think, at the time, and he's the one who signed the deal on that. And it was pretty exciting.
Awesome.
Yeah, because I mean that would be another platform because Dragon's Lair. Honestly, we've looked into it because I do a lot of work with Digital Leisure, and the only other game in the world that's been ported to more platforms we've already mentioned is Tetris. So Dragon's Lair actually stands as number 2 in terms of the number of ports. Not even Pac-Man has been ported to as many platforms as Dragon's Lair. So that's at least officially. There's probably lots of unofficial Pac-Man ports maybe on more platforms, but.
That was kind of the joke we always have is like Pac-Man's the most ported game, but unofficially. It's like Dragon's Lair, you couldn't unofficially port that in any way.
Yeah.
It would look awful. Stick figures, maybe.
Even since my book came out a couple of years ago now, there's been versions that have come out, and people have managed, and it's kind of interesting, and I'm actually going to ask some of the developers if there was some inspiration from the Game Boy Color version, because there's been full motion versions of the Dragon's Lair game, because basically on the platforms that couldn't support the full motion video, they had these, sort of games that were inspired, platform games that were inspired by Dragon's Lair. Of course, if anyone's ever watched The Angry Video Game Nerd, you can find out how much he loves the NES version of Dragon's Lair. But there's been people that have been working on full motion versions of Dragon's Lair on older hardware now that storage isn't an issue for a lot of them. So, for example, there's a version for the ZX81 that comes on an SD card now.
Seriously?
Yeah, but the only way you can, play it is if you have sort of an emulation that supports a larger storage device, because of course there just wasn't anything on there. But what you managed to do with this version is get it onto an actual production cartridge and make it a real product. And for doing that in 4 megabytes and making it as true to the original as possible, and it certainly does feel that way, and it works well, and it's great. So thank you for that great version, and a great job doing that for one of my favorite classic arcade games, if not certainly my favorite arcade game of all time.
Yeah, I was going to say one of. I think it is the favorite.
Wow.
Yeah, I would say that has to be your favorite, right, Sid? Because I know you as the Dragon's Lair guy.
Yeah,
you are Dirk the Daring after all. So.
That's true. That is my Xbox. Well, I managed to get that as an Xbox and a PSN ID, so I got there right in the beginning. So yeah, I guess that's true.
Well, Michael, thank you so much for being on the show. Why don't you tell everybody before we go, what is it you're working on now, and can people follow you on Twitter, or where can they get more information about you?
Yeah, so I've been doing a kind of a dual role. I'm at Other Ocean working on the update for IDARB, which is going to include Walking Dead, Invincible, and then we just announced He-Man maps and some new halftime games and all that stuff. So that update's coming this fall. We just launched the other thing I've been working on is I'm also helping out with Digital Eclipse, our now reclaimed brand that we had originally published Dragon's Lair under. And that's focusing on bringing back classic arcade games, home games, in a way that's, I would say, like authentic to the era and the time and the context. So we're getting right down to making sure that we simulate like CRT distortion from RF modulation and all that sort of thing, and prepping it so that it's able to be adapted and ported very easily to future platforms in a way that it doesn't mean you have to reinvent the wheel every time. Or when, like in the case where a lot of emulators that are out there right now that don't have the colors right, aren't trying to simulate the proper aspect ratio, that sort of thing. I want to make sure that embedded in this is that you're representing it in the true artist intent kind of way, so that when you look at what we just launched now, which is the Mega Man Legacy Collection, we went back and made sure that the characters, the screen, everything that you see is the artistic intent of the people who created the artwork for the game. They were designing these sprites and everything on CRTs, so even though a lot of people really love the super crisp pixels and you have the ability to do that, the reality is the game was designed not for that. And so you want to be able to have that mode of play as well. So we're focusing on that sort of thing. We just launched Mega Man Legacy Collection. We have other things in the pipe that we're going to bring out in that regard. So we're very happy to have that label back. And then I'm also working on a number of other things at the moment that we unfortunately can't talk about, but coming into next spring, we'll be announcing things along the lines of like IDARB, where it's open, transparent game development. And we're basically going to take what we did with IDARB, ratchet it up to 11, and do some crazier, stupider stuff and see what comes out of it. Because that was a really fun process. But you can follow me and hear more about that stuff at Mike J. Mika at Twitter, so at Mike J. Mika, or follow at IDARB Game to see what's going on with IDARB, and also go to digitalclips.com and otherocean.com to see what's cooking.
Awesome. And you can also see, if you want to know what Mike looks like, you can watch him on the Atari documentary, if anyone has watched that, for free on your Xbox, because he's in that, and other documentaries, I'm sure, as well. I'm sure you're in lots of stuff. So,
well, he is the Donkey Kong dad, after all.
I am the Donkey Kong dad, after all.
You are well known for that, for sure.
Michael, thank you so much for being on Lost Treasures of Gaming. It has been a pleasure.
It's really fun. This has been great.
Man, that was a great interview.
Yeah, I love Mike. Such a great guy, so knowledgeable, has worked on so many things, willing to share his knowledge, and just a great guy all around.
I felt like I hardly said anything this episode because the two of you really just you worked off each other, and because you're such a huge fan, probably as much as he does about the game, so it was great just listening to the two of you bounce off each other.
Yeah, and if we live closer, one of the things we didn't talk about when we were talking about with Mike is that he's also a huge video game collector as well. He has a very impressive collection of games and memorabilia in his basement, so much like myself. So, I think if we didn't live on opposite coasts, I think we'd be hanging out together a lot more.
You're long-lost brothers.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, not too far off in terms of age, and a lot of the same experiences. We talked offline. Didn't really make it into the interview, but we talked about we both had some interesting experiences with Commodore equipment at our local Kmart's, and it's just funny how something like that, so strange how we both did something sort of very, very similar, but on two opposite sides of the country. Well, and even he's in the United States and we're in Canada, so the continent. So pretty amazing, but great guy and very knowledgeable.
Absolutely. Now, we do have that little story about Kmart. We could throw it in as a bonus here at the end of the show.
All right, well, feel free to do that. I'm sure that's fine.
So look for that right after all of this. Thanks, everybody, for listening to Lost Treasures of Gaming. Of course, don't forget to visit twitch.tv/GH101 every Friday night at 11:30 Eastern Standard Time as Fred Rojas from Gaming History 101 will stream the very game we've been talking about. So, as Sid said in the show, he's looking forward to see how well Fred will do in Dragon's Lair, because it is not an easy game.
No, he's going to be frustrated.
That's right. Sure. Of course, follow this show on Twitter. We are Lost Treasures OG, and you can follow me pretty much everywhere on every gaming platform online on Twitter as Zion
And you can follow me on Twitter at Sid Bolton, and that's Sid with a Y, just like Australia. And if you are interested in using email to send us your comments or maybe send us a suggestion for Lost Treasure we should do in a future episode or a guest that we should have on the show, please do so at losttreasuresofgaming@gmail.com. And if you want to find out more about tonight's episode and find out where you can find some links to Mike or some other stuff, please visit the show notes, which you can find at omgnexus.com.
So that's it. Thank you again for listening to this episode. If you want to get a preview of what we might be talking about next week, don't forget to listen to our mother show, the OMG Hour, where you'll hear about another lost treasure next week. So thanks, Sid, again, and it was a great interview with Michael, and we'll be back again next week.
See you soon.
Very good, very good. I'm opening up a Diet Coke.
There we go.
Explosive on the microphone.
That's all right.
That's okay. I was laughing. I was explaining to my wife who you are, and I told her the Donkey Kong story thing, and so I showed her. I was just trying to find it on YouTube on my TV, and I found this this early interview with you. Well, not early. I mean, you were definitely younger looking at it, but you were talking about Kmart and how you wouldn't, your parents would be shopping in Kmart. Well, I almost have the exact same story, except that I went into Kmart, and what I would do is by the time I went into Kmart, I already had my Commodore 64.
Mm-hmm.
So I was, and you have to understand, I was always a very good child. I never got in trouble. I think I was only grounded once for playing with matches. Like, I was a good boy. But there was a mischievous side of me that came out when I was confronted with a Commodore 64 in the store. And so what I would do is I would actually go up to it and I would, just toggle the volume control, which is what I think 53281 was the color register for the border, right?
Or 80 was probably the border and 81 was the background.
80, probably the background. Okay, so it's scary that I even remember these numbers.
I know. And why did I even answer on that?
Like, holy cow. But anyway, so whatever the volume register was, I found that, like, if you just poked it with 0 and then poked it with 15, which was the maximum, and then just looped that, it made a horrendous sound. So I would just write, 10, poke, whatever, comma, 0, whatever, poke, comma, 15, and then, 30, go to 10. And then just run it. And then what actually before that, the first time I did that, I was like, and I turned the volume up, and then I didn't want to get in trouble. So I put this delay in there, and then I ran it, and then our Kmart was in a mall, so what I did was, like, I ran to the edge of the, like, where, just on the outside of the public part of the mall, just far enough that I could hear it go off, but far enough away that no one would ever realize it was me. And, so then I'd be, like, at the edge and I'd be listening, and then all of a sudden, and then you'd see these associates scramble to try to turn the volume off for sure. So I'm just listening to you talk about sitting there programming. I didn't do anything cool, like write a game or anything, but I just did some annoying stuff when I was, that was my way of being mischievous when I was a kid.
Or did you write the ultimate game? Actually, I think that's the question, right?
Yeah, that's right. The ultimate game was me and had some action stealth to it.
That's right.
Yeah.
The action stealth, but anyway.
This has been an OMGNexus.com production.